this is Deboki, and today for Not My Thesis, I want to talk about picking an advisor because, yeah, this is basically the most important decision I think you make in grad school. It's basically the whole reason you go to grad school is to work with this one person for your whole time there. I think I've mentioned this in my grad school crises video. It's basically like picking your parent, but it's also really similar to dating because you're like trying to find out, are you interested in this person? Are they interested in you? Except you're dating to find your parent, so you're also like trying to find someone who will, like, I don't know, manage you and like be able to give you good advice, so it's like a little bit different than dating in that sense. I don't know, it's something that's so important and it's hard to figure it out until you're in the middle of it, but I just felt like, I feel like I've been kind of seeing these conversations about rotations kind of crop up every year, and I've talked to some people who are going through it now. My disclaimer that comes up a lot when I'm talking about grad school still applies here. Things vary from department to department, from field to field, from grad school to grad school. Different programs will do things in different ways. So my advice here is based very much on the way that my school kind of runs its rotation systems, but other schools do things more formally. Other schools don't do rotations at all. So let's step back. So basically, I think there's kind of two maybe overarching systems when it comes to finding your advisor. The first is that you can go to a grad school where you are actually admitted directly to work with a specific person. So maybe during your visit weekend, you talk to a bunch of professors, and when you actually get your final admissions letter, it says, like, you know, this professor is interested in working with you. And so when you start off your first year, you basically get to start your research right away. You get to start working in this lab, and I think that's the real advantage of the system. The other system is that you don't come in with an advisor, but you do rotation. So this is something like my school where, in my program, where you are admitted and, you know, the first few weeks of grad school you email, or even during the summer, you email a bunch of professors and you say like, hey, I'm really interested in your research. Can I do a rotation with you? And based on a lot of different factors, like, you know, what projects they have available, what their funding situation is, whether or not they're even on campus that year, those kinds of things will shape whether or not you can do a rotation with them. To me, this system is actually, I'm so glad I went to a school with this system. Whatever the advantages of being able to start your research right away, for me, having the ability to try out different labs was an invaluable part of my first year experience, because with the other kind of system where you're directly admitted to working with like a certain PI, I feel like, especially for someone like me, I would have felt kind of compelled to stay with that person even if it became clear that maybe the research wasn't for me. In that kind of system, you can change advisors, but I feel like that adds a level of hassle in the sense that, like, you are falling behind if you change your advisor. So yeah, I am really glad that I had rotations. For me especially, like, I came in thinking I wanted to do one kind of research. I thought I wanted to do computational modeling of biological systems. And my first rotation was based on that. And I really thought, like, this is gonna be the one. I won't need to do other rotations. I'm gonna really like this lab. I'm gonna really like this research. And that was not my experience for a lot of reasons. And a big one was actually that I just realized that this research that I really enjoyed as an undergrad was not what I wanted to do in grad school. I really wanted to do something more experimental, and especially I wanted to try out this field that I'd been hearing more and more about called synthetic biology. So for future rotations, I actually did a rotation with a synthetic biology professor, and I really enjoyed that, and that kind of helped me then jump into another rotation with my now advisor. Typically people in our program do 3 rotations. Some people do 4. Technically I did 4. I did mine all through the summer. For a lot of people in our program, they finish their rotations at the end of the spring semester. I actually went into the summer after that and found my advisor over the summer. So I think that other programs have a more rigid system where you, like, actually say at the beginning of the school year, like, these are the people I'm going to be working for, and you have like set timelines. That's again a thing that varies program to program. So if you are in grad school, or you're thinking about grad school, or you're about to start grad school, that's a thing to kind of talk to upperclassmen about, to kind of figure out how you would balance, like, how you would pick your rotations. And I think talking to upperclassmen is a really good way to find out more about the labs. Basically, going into it, the only thing you're gonna know without talking to them is what the research the PI is doing. Like, they'll be able to tell you, like, I don't know, XYZ with this disease or something. And that's great, and you might think that that sounds like all you need to know, but there's really so many other factors at play that will actually shape whether or not this is the right lab for you. I think there are like some major factors. I don't even know if I'm going to get to all of them, but just to try. I think when you're trying to figure out if the advisor themselves will be good, I think you really have to consider what kind of interaction you want with your advisor. There are some PIs who are very hands-off. They like have a very long established lab. They might have a lot of people, and so your interaction with them is not going to be that significant. Whereas there are other PIs who might be a little bit more hands-on. A lot of people respond to different management styles differently, right? Like you might want someone who's a little more hands-off because you like having that independence. I'm glad that my advisor is a little bit more involved because I like having that constant interaction to kind of constantly troubleshoot. I get frustrated with him about it, but it's good to have that interaction. And you might want to also consider the scope of the projects, also their publishing history. This will vary a lot if they're a newer PI or an older PI, but it's good to keep in mind. And I think another big thing that will be really helpful is to consider PIs who are open to whether or not you want to be in academia. There's very much a strong tradition of academics being biased towards sending their students into academia. And my feeling is that some of the younger PIs who have dealt with the job market more recently are a little like not realistic to like send all grad students into academia. But it's good to like kind of to know up front, even if you don't know what you're going to do after grad school, to find a PI who will be open to helping you with different types of jobs, because you might think you really want to do academia, but I thought I really wanted to do academia and I'm still figuring it out, because grad school will teach you a lot about academia that's not particularly great. You also just want to know, like, are they someone you can talk to? Even if they're not micromanaging, like, are they going to be someone that you can have a helpful conversation with? Whether it's once a week, once a day, 5 times a day, once a year. You just want to know that when you do talk to them, you're going to be able to get the feedback that you're seeking. I think another major consideration is the culture of the lab, and these are things like, how big is the lab? Is it a really competitive lab? Are people really collaborative? Are people nice to each other? Do they hang out a lot? And is it like, what's the schedule of the people working there? Are there is it more heavily grad student based? Is it more heavily postdoc based? And it's kind of like family, right? Like, these are going to be the people that you spend most of your time with for a long period of time. So it's good to know that you can at least handle what that lab culture is. And again, these are all so individual that they can really take forms in different ways. Things like postdoc versus grad student can really affect the dynamic in really different ways. Postdocs they have a lot of helpful experience, but depending on the lab, sometimes they're a little bit more maybe self-centered because they're really trying to establish their career. In other labs, they might be more like generous. I think it really can vary a lot from lab to lab. Another big consideration is funding, and this is kind of a tough one. My advice is, if you're asking about a lab, if you're asking an upperclassman, one of the things that they won't be able to help you out with too much is what the funding situation lab is like. I mean, there might be some grad students who do, but it's always in flux. Like, PIs are basically there to write grants all the time and publish papers. And so whether or not they're going to get a new grant, what the funding situation is like on older grants, on like what their money is like, my experience is that most grad students don't really know that. So sometimes like first years will ask me, and like, I don't know. But you can ask the PI, like you can ask, like, do you think you would have funding for me? And this can be a huge issue, because you might be interested in working with someone, they might be interested in working with you, but if they don't have the money to do it, they can't. So I think another important thing is to make sure that you're applying for fellowships. If you are applying for grad school, apply for fellowships that you can your senior year. Another thing that I think is really great about rotations versus being admitted directly into a lab is that you get the opportunity to learn skills from different labs within the same school. And if you're trying out, you could really use rotations as an opportunity to get to know different fields that you might not have experience with before. And what that can really help you do is kind of build up your repertoire of like experimental techniques. So even if you're working in a lab that you know you might not want to work in, you can learn from it, right? Like, you can get experience there that you might not be able to get once you're actually staying in a lab. Another thing I wanted to kind of quickly mention is I've heard this kind of refrain coming from first years in this past year, which is kind of the fear of wasting a rotation. This idea that you might like do a rotation and somehow, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what it means. I think it means that you do a rotation and it doesn't do anything for you. And I just want to say that I don't think that that's possible. I think the only way you can waste a rotation is if you rotate with someone and you know for like very definite reasons that you are never going to work there and that you're also not going to learn anything there. You can do a rotation and hate the lab, but that can be extremely helpful. That's not a waste. If like I said, for me, my first rotation, I realized that I didn't want to work in that lab, and that was a good outcome. It was much better that I figured that out within the first few weeks of grad school as opposed to the first few years. Like, I got it out of the way and I moved on and I found a different field that I wanted to work in. My first rotation in the synthetic biology lab, I was really hopeful for, but there wasn't a spot for me. And that was still a really good rotation because it taught me a lot about the field and got me interested and kind of put me in a position to rotate with my current advisor. There's someone else in my lab who knew from the beginning that he was going to be working with my advisor, but he really used his rotations wisely to pick up new skills and to build collaborations, and he actually got a paper out of one of his rotations. So I think the only way you can waste a rotation is if you consciously decide to get nothing from it. Negative data is actually pretty helpful. It helps you troubleshoot your life in this case, so it's good. Having a bad rotation can be helpful. If all of them are bad, that's also good, because now you know that this grad school isn't right for you and you figured that out in your first year and you can go somewhere else. It sounds like the end of the world because you just started grad school, but it's actually not. It's like way better than ending up like 7 years in and like miserable because you ended up at a place with the research that was not right for you. Yeah, so if you have questions, if you want me to get more specific about any of these different factors that I kind of mentioned, I did kind of go through them quickly, but I think it's so personal that it's hard to kind of give all the advantages and disadvantages of each because I am so biased by what my own preferences are. So yeah, but if you do have questions about any of those, let me know. Yeah, and bye.